So, good morning. We're starting a new series today in 1 Samuel. Can we have the headline slide up? Don't get too excited about these slides. There's only one other. 1 Samuel. And so my task this morning, because, go on to the next slide, the way we're going to approach 1 Samuel is to do themes in 1 Samuel. Normally we'd go through the book, chapter by chapter, let the story unfold. But there's a huge amount of stuff in 1 Samuel, and so after struggling to try and divide it up and make good sense of it and try and do justice to the book and to the way the story unfolds, we felt that there would be a good way of doing this would be to just look at some themes. So some of these themes are going to jump around a little bit. So my task this morning is for those of you who don't know the story, who are kind of new to this, to give you a kind of overview of the whole book so you know how it fits together. And what I want to do is encourage you, if you've never read this, if you have a Bible at home, right? 1 Samuel comes sort of that far through, and I'd encourage you to read it. Just sit and read it. If you don't read, then you can get it on audio. You can, listen to it. Somebody else reading it. If you're in a family, maybe at mealtimes you could sit down and you could read a chapter or two. Just find some time just to read through the story. It's a great story. So immerse yourself in this story. If you get to the end of 1 Samuel, carry on to 2 Samuel, because I'll give you a clue. It's kind of a book in two halves. So do read it, okay? It'll help you as we're going through these subjects. It'll help you to know how this whole fits together. But my task this morning really is to give you an overview, and I've got 3 themes that I want to pick out, and I'm hoping not to really steal anybody's thunder in what they're going to preach on as the time goes by. But there are 3 themes that I felt kind of gave an overview of the book. Because if you do themes in a book, often the risk is you don't see where they're coming from. It's just like we've raided Scripture for some stuff. But actually, God is at work in building this story. So, where does 1 Samuel fit in the overall story? Let's go back to the beginning. God created heaven and earth, okay? He made the earth to be the place where he would display his glory through humanity. He puts man in the center of his creation, and he makes him good. He looks at his creation, and he says, this is good. And yet man chooses to go his own way. And so when we see all the problems in the world, we recognize that's because man has chosen his own way. When you lie, when you steal, when you cheat, when you do not reflect the glory of God, then you're first of all failing to be human and failing to be what God has made you to be within society. But that problem that we see across the world is man's problem, isn't it? It's not creation's problem. It's because man has chosen to go his own way. But God didn't leave us there. God didn't leave us in that situation of hopelessness. And he, right from that beginning, we've got those first 3 chapters of Genesis that tell us how that mess happened. The rest of the book is him telling us a story of how he's sorting it out. And first of all, come to several chapters into Genesis, God calls a man, Abraham, a man who he plucks from his world and gives him promises that through him, he is going to bless the whole of humanity. The whole world would be blessed through this one man. Nothing special about this guy. He's got the same problems as you and I. He's no different from you and I. But God puts his promises on him. That's good news, isn't it? Good news for you and I. That God can put his promises on us and say, I'm going to use you and I'm going to make a difference through you. through this one man Abraham, he's going to sort out the whole of this big mess that is humanity. And that's this man Abraham. He has a family. And that family carries both the promises of God and the problems. And so as we go through the years, they go into slavery into Egypt. God brings them out of slavery through the Exodus. And we've dealt with a lot of those chapters when we've looked at back, and we've done Exodus, we've done Leviticus, we've done Numbers. We're just skipping a few stories on because he brings them back into the land in book of Joshua. And then we get the book of Judges, and it seems like this people do not know who they are. They feel like they've lost all that sense of the promise of God upon them, lost the sense of the purpose and direction they had. They're a nation that's oppressed by all the nations around them, just seem to come and pick things off all the time. They're leaderless. But God does raise up leaders from time to time. Gideon is a classic figure. And then we come to 1 Samuel. And the book of 1 Samuel tells the story of how this nation decides that they are going to they want to have a king. Just like all the other nations. They want to be like the other guys. You know what our problem is? We haven't got a king. You know why we don't know where we're going? Because we haven't got a king who'll lead us out in battle. We haven't got a king who looks impressive in the diplomatic circles. This is what we need. And yet this is a nation that's meant to be different. It's meant to be a people who are led by God himself. Why would you swap being a nation that's led by God for a nation that's led by a king? And that's what they want. Back in the days of Moses, he said, the day's going to come when you're going to want a king. And he's going to be bad news for you guys. He's going to cause you a lot of problems. He's going to take your men to fight in his battles. He's going to take your daughters and make them his wives. He's going to rob this nation. But you're still going to do it. And God's going to bring something good out of it, despite the fact that that's not what you're meant to do. You're meant to be a people who are led by God himself. And so this book of 1 Samuel takes us through that story. The transition from the judges, who are men and women raised up by God to lead the people, into the transition to having a king. And we find ourselves, I'm conscious I've got so much to cover, but I want to do it fairly neatly and concisely. And I also feel like God's got something to say to you, so I don't want to miss that in this process. But the structure of the book, if we take 1 and 2 Samuel together, they're kind of two halves of one book. 1 Samuel builds us up to the point of Saul's death. Saul is the first king of Israel, and then 2 Samuel starts. It finishes. 1 Samuel finishes with the death of Saul. 2 Samuel begins with the death of Saul, and at either end we have the beginning where the nation is in oppression under the Philistines, and 2 Samuel ends with Israel being a substantial nation where other nations bring tribute to them. They have a king. They are honored. They are well established. Okay, and it pivots around this central figure of Saul's death. It's the central event of Saul's death. There are 3 things I want us to pick out of this book. And those 3 things are that God is at work in renewal. The situation that Israel finds itself is that they are oppressed and under the thumb. And yet God is at work in renewal. Second thing is that leadership is important. And the third thing is that a king is coming. Any chance of a drink of water? Yeah. Otherwise this talk might be even shorter than anything else. Get dried out. Thank you very much. We start off the story with Israel is in a mess. It's oppressed. It's impoverished and it's directionless. At the end of Judges, it says that at the time of the Judges, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. They have no idea which way they're going. And yet this is a nation with incredible promises. It is to be the blessing to the entire world. God is at work through this small people. He's drawn them out of Egypt. He's given them tremendous blessing and defended them from the oppression that they were under. Thank you very much. Whoa. But now they find themselves oppressed, directionless, impoverished. They don't even have the weapons that they need to fight with. They don't even have the weapons, the things they need to plow the ground with. They have to go to the Philistines, who have all the blacksmiths, to buy things from them just to do their normal work. This doesn't look like an impressive nation, does it? Israel is in a mess. And yet God has a plan. And you might imagine this story would start with an incredibly impressive, God's going to be at work. You would think it would start in the powerhouse. And yet the story starts with a barren woman. It starts in a secret place. A woman going up to the priest to pray, to say, God, give me a child. She's an expression of the childlessness of the nation, the impoverished state of the nation, the oppressed state of the nation. She's an expression of that. And this woman, she prays and asks God for a child. Does it remind you of any other stories? The beginning of Luke's Gospel, which you often read in the lead up to Christmas, of Elizabeth going and saying, God, give me a child. And when you read the story of Elizabeth, at the beginning of the Christmas story, the story of the coming Messiah, you're meant to remember this story, that God is at work, and it starts with a barren woman. God is at work in renewal. He starts in a small and hidden way. And I want you to know that you may feel like you're in a mess right now. You may feel like the world has oppressed you. You may feel like you've got no hope and no future. But God's message to you this morning is He is at work. You may feel like every effort you've made to change things, every effort to sort things out, like the judges that have come along. You've had moments when things have gone well, moments when things have been good, and yet here you are, oppressed, directionless, and impoverished. But God wants you to know that He is at work in renewal. And it starts in the small and hidden place. What is going on in your life right now that God is at work in? What's that quiet and secret place? Not in the sight of anybody else. It's not happening out there. It's happening deep inside. What is God doing in you to bring renewal? Because this story has a glorious ending. It ends in the majesty and glory of God. The Messiah is going to come. We'll come to that in a minute. but it starts in the secret and hidden place. What is God doing in the hidden place in your life? Second thing I want to say, I want to highlight in this book, is the story of leadership. Leadership is incredibly important. We see a number of leaders appearing through this story. Eli is the first one. Eli, who is the judge who's at work at the beginning, and he passes on to Samuel. And, well, in this story he does. Little excursion here. Actually, the book of Judges tells us that Samson features in the middle of that story. He doesn't appear in 1 Samuel, but actually we go from Eli to Samson, then to Samuel. And you kind of miss that because Samson's story is in Judges and not in 1 Samuel. But so we'll just keep Samson out of this for a while. It felt like I needed to cover that. But in this story we have figures like Eli and Samuel and Saul and David, and each one of them bring enormous change to the nation. Their decisions, the choices they make, the way they operate, affect the whole nation. Leadership is incredibly important. The choices a leader makes will affect a whole people. And you might be sitting there thinking, well, thank God I'm not a leader. Well, I just want to tell you that you are. The leadership you bring into your home matters. The leadership you bring in your family matters. The leadership you bring in your place of work matters. The leadership you bring in the church matters. The choices that you make have consequences on other people. And as you read this book, as you go through it and you see the characters and the choices they make, you realize how important those things are. It's not something you can ignore. It's not something you can say, well, it doesn't really matter. I kind of like to sit this one out. I just kind of like not to really be... As long as I have no responsibility, as long as I've got nothing to do, that's a decision of leadership. That's an abdication of leadership. This nation, this community, this church, your family, your place of work, they are longing for you to lead and lead well. So as we're going through this book, please hear the lessons of leadership. Hear the lessons that the choices you make really do matter. You need to be the leader that God has called you to be in your family, in your work, in the church. Be the leader that God has called you to be. Another little subsection of this. Raising up next generation leaders is incredibly hard. That's another thing you see in this book. Take Eli, for example. His sons are an absolute disaster. Samuel's sons are equally an absolute disaster. If you get into 2 Samuel, David's sons are an absolute disaster. We need to learn something in this. Raising up next generation leadership is very, very hard. Actually, the only one who comes out good in this is, guess who? Saul. Saul, who we'd all pick out as being the disaster. Actually, his son, Jonathan, is a great character. No, We could chat about that for a while, couldn't we? And the lesson is not be a rubbish father, okay? But raising up next generation leadership is incredibly difficult. But we need to do it. We need to see what God is doing in raising up leadership. We don't need to be Old Testament people. We can believe for better than this. We can believe that God has something great for us in seeing succession come after succession come after succession. I've often said, when people said, "Oh, you should do parenting talks," I said, "Well, I'd like to see how my great-grandchildren are first." And I really mean that. I don't know whether I've done a good job in parenting until I see my great-grandchildren. That might be a little bit late to do the parenting talk, but it would certainly give me some confidence that I'd done an okay job. But come back to it. You need to be the leader that God has called you to be. And don't abdicate yourself from that. As I say, a lot of you will be sitting there thinking, "Well, that doesn't really apply to me. I just go to work. I just do my job. I just, my wife looks after the kids. I don't need to think about these things." And nobody's going to ask me to lead a small group. Nobody's going to ask me to do anything at church. I'll come. I'll do the setup. I'll do PA. I'll do something quiet on the side. Leadership doesn't really apply to me. It does. Leadership really matters. And the choices of leaders affect other people and affect the direction of things going. And I'm including every single one of you. Male and female, old and young. You're all included. Leadership matters. And the final thing I want to say is the great news of this book is a king is coming. They cry out for a king. They say, "We want a king to be like other nations. We want to be just like the other nations." And God gives them a king. He gives them a king who's head and shoulders above everybody else. And that's Saul. He says, "Okay, I'll give you a king. He'll be just like the sort of king you're after." He looks around and he chooses Saul out of the whole crowd. He's taller than the others. He's an impressive figure. He's just the sort of king you'd want to go out and fight your enemies. But he's a disaster. We come to the end of 2 Samuel, and we've got David, who's also an impressive figure, a great leader, and he's demonstrated as a hero. In fact, in 1 Samuel, we see his story. A story of being a man after God's own heart. A story of a man who is rejected and misunderstood. A man who is patient and humble. Remind you of anybody? He's just a bit like Jesus. Rejected, yet humble and patient. Just like Jesus. In asking for a king, Israel was rejecting God as king. And yet where this story is going is that God will be their king in person. He will come in the person of Jesus. He will come as a man who is rejected and yet will lead them into all the promises that God had given to Abraham. He will lead them into incredible blessing. He will transform the whole of creation and restore it and renew it in the way that he was meant to. God will come as king. So David we see as a hero, but he's just a hero who is a shadow of what is coming. And so as you're reading through 1 Samuel, and I'm assuming you're going to carry on reading into 2 Samuel, because you won't be able to stop. I want you to see how it's leading us to the one true king, the one Messiah who is going to sort out all these problems. The problems that were within Abraham, were within that family, within this family that causes all these problems, that is directionless and under oppression. And he's going to bring success and freedom and liberty to the whole of humanity. And that's the blessing that's coming to you because of the person of Jesus. That is what you have inherited. That this was a nation, this was a people who were special, set apart, but you get to be included in that. You get to be included in those promises. So 3 things I want you to take home from this. First is renewal is at work. Remember that. Look for what God is doing in the small and quiet place in your life. And take hope and courage from that. I'm going to pray for you in a minute. But I think that applies to a lot of people here today. You feel like you don't know where you're going. You feel like everything you've tried has failed. You feel oppressed and hopeless. And just like we were singing that song earlier on, Jesus is coming to you to change that, to bring hope back. It starts in the barrenness of your life at the moment. And the promise of God upon you is that he is at work in renewal. Second thing, leadership is important. Choices you make really do matter. They matter for the people you work amongst, the family that God has put around you, whether that's brothers, sisters, parents, children, the people you work with. They count on you to make good choices. So learn the lessons of this book. And the third thing, the incredible hope, is that a real king is coming. The true king is coming in this story. We get the benefit of looking back on it. We get the benefit of having a New Testament that explains where this was all going. They were looking forward to that. When they were living these days, they were looking forward to a day when God would come and rescue his people and deliver them and be the king that they really wanted. In the meantime, they had to live through bad king after bad king after bad king after a slightly better king after a really bad king. No. We thought it was going somewhere. Jesus is the king we were longing for. And so give yourself to him. Give yourself wholly and incontrovertibly to him. Submit to him. Put yourself under his lordship and his reign if you want to see things flourish, if you want to see the blessing that God has for you. Let me pray for you. Father, I thank you for this book. And Father, I look forward to what you're going to talk to us about through these themes that we're going to look at. I thank you for your grace upon us that extends to us, that you love us, that you care about us. Each one of us, you have seen and you know. I pray for these different subjects that we're going to cover. Some of them are positives, some of them are negatives. And yet in your world, in what you're doing, you are going to transform everything for your good and for your glory, and for our good and for our blessing. God, I pray for those who right now are struggling with a feeling of emptiness and oppression. And I thank you that you are at work in every single situation. I thank you there is no situation in this room that is beyond your power to renew. I thank you there is no place for hopelessness where you are, because you can do anything. And I thank you that even when it looks like everything's hopeless, you will bring good. Lord, I thank you that for what you've called us to as a people, that you've called us to be part of the solution when we were part of the problem. And I pray that you'd raise up leaders amongst us that bring out leaders, that bring out leaders, that bring out leaders. Leaders within our community, leaders within our church, leaders within our families. I pray that you would give us the gift of leadership in this place. But most of all, Lord, I thank you that whatever we are, we look to you because you're the King. You're the glorious one. You are our hope. Thank you, Lord. Amen.